Welcome back to the Social Worker Podcast, the space where we highlight real stories, real professionals, and real impact within social work, mental health, and child welfare. Today's episode is especially powerful because we're talking about representation, healing, and breaking cycles. I'm joined by Philip Wells, a licensed mental health counselor and a social worker, a former school counselor, educator, and the founder of the Players Coach, a private practice based right here in South Florida. Philip works primarily with adults, entrepreneurs, working professionals, and athletes, helping them navigate depression, stress, identity, and performance, both personally and professionally. But beyond the credentials, Philip's story matters. As an African male therapist, he represents something our community desperately needs: more visibility, access, and culturally responsive care. Thank you for joining us on the Social Worker podcast. One thing that I have tried to incorporate, right, is that therapy is so big, social work is so big, and you actually have, like, it's interesting because you're a social worker, but then you're also a licensed mental health clinician. Sometimes a path that, like, you're the first person that I've heard who actually did that, right? But before we get into the degrees and everything, tell us about who you are.
Yeah. And I'm so glad to be here. I really appreciate being offered to be here. So, my name is Philip Wells. I like to tell people that I'm a believer, father, husband, overall, just an easygoing guy. Obviously, professionally, I'm a therapist and I love the work that I do. I love working with working professionals, entrepreneurs, and really what I focus on is helping them to overcome depression, anxiety, anything getting in the way of their performance. And that's really where I get the excitement from. I really like to pull from my sports background and try to see myself as a coach. And naturally, that's the reason why my brand and everything is called the Players Coach, because when you play sports, if you have the right coach, you're able to reach heights that you never were able to reach before. So that's a big part of who I am and what I do. Overall, I'm from South Carolina. I moved down to Miami back in 2017, and I really just came down here on a whim. I said, hey, I got my degrees and all that stuff. If I moved and failed, I could always go back to South Carolina, and here I am, literally I want to say 9 that I've been here in South Florida, and it's been great ever since. So I love it. I love what I do, and anyone that's looking to start therapy, which we'll talk about today, I tell them jump right on in, both feet. So yeah.
So growing up as an African American male, how was that, and how did that shape you into who you are today?
Yeah. What's funny about that is that growing up, your idols are typically rappers, ball players, maybe some actors, if you will. But for me, that's always been like my safe space, specifically sports. And now I'm able to take like a language that I know, just like I'm fluent in English. Like some people, they may not be fluent in therapy, but they may be fluent in sports. And I'm able to take that and make that connection with them. So for me, growing up, like sports was always just an outlet. I grew up very humble. Didn't really have much. I grew up one of 5. So, times you didn't always have what you wanted, but you had what you needed. And because life at home wasn't really like always ideal, I use sports as like an escape. And it's really shaped like who I am today, And honestly, this is probably why I'm in the field that I am, because I saw myself in a lot of the people that I work with, So just trying to be that light to others, because I received that light from someone else, in the form of mentorship and all those things. So it was tough, but it's kind of like it can be a beautiful struggle, if you will. J. Cole, he has a song called Crooked Smiles, and I really connected with that because it's all about acceptance, because there's always something better. If you focus on those things, like, you'll find yourself depressed and overwhelmed, but there's a lot of beauty even in the crooked smiles of our lives. So yeah.
What kind of traumas were you exposed to as a child that you think helped shape you into because there are many different paths you could have taken, but like you said, crooked smiles was something that you could relate to. What kind of traumas did you experience growing up, if you're open to sharing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the biggest one was probably seeing my brother, who I love dearly. he was kind of like a hero, right? Like I saw him more of a hero than I saw my own dad. And, he went off to college and all that stuff and, was bummed out about that. But when he came back very different. And what happened to him was he developed a mental health disorder. So schizophrenia to be specifically. And if anyone knows what that's like, it's a very devastating mental health condition. And it was almost my first time going through grief. And a lot of times when we think about grief, we think about it in terms of someone passing away. But grief can show up in the form of, breakups, divorce, moving from one city to the next, or as I mentioned it, having the dynamics of a relationship change. And for me, there was a lot of anger, right? Because I didn't understand and kind of just wanted this person to snap right back. And, that wasn't happening. But also, I think there was this like internal struggle with being able to accept what is so I can move forward with this new relationship. And that took me probably, I want to say maybe 10 years just to kind of like move past and accept. And now it's definitely a better relationship, I would say. And that's my first time experiencing, like trauma on that side. So it wasn't even like directly to me, but it's being a part of someone else's story. Yeah.
And that's that vicarious trauma where, you can learn from anything and everybody. So I wanted to, when we spoke, one of the things that you spoke about was I asked, do you do therapy with kids? And one thing about therapy or therapists, especially when you're like an entrepreneur, we have that mindset of, oh, I can do it all. I can serve everybody. But what was different about you was that you already had that boundary set. You're like, nope, I do adults. Can you tell me what was that determining factor like for you?
Yeah. Great question. At the beginning of my journey, I was just trying to figure it all out. So I would just see anybody, right? If you had money and was willing to see me, hey, we met. Soon after, I started to find myself hating the own business that I created. And it's like, why? Why is that the case? And I started to realize there were some clients that I was drawn to where it just felt like a conversation, right? Almost to the point where you'll look up and the hour's already gone and you're like, what happened, right? Like it just went by so fast. And then there's some clients where you're kind of looking at the clock and you're like, wow, only 10 minutes has gone by and you're just kind of struggling. And from there, I started to see that, man, there was something I connected with when it came to other entrepreneurs or other working professionals, especially ones that are looking to become entrepreneurs. And from there, it just kind of took hold of me, if you will. Working with kids, at least for myself, sometimes you run into kids who don't want to be there. They're there because mom or dad or whoever said that they have to be, and that motivation isn't quite there. And for me, could I get them motivated? Yeah, but I think that would take more from me than I would be willing to give. So right now, the clients that I see, I feel like it's a reciprocal effect. Like I pour into them and the work we do together kind of feeds into me as well. So, yeah.
And that's like one of the things that my husband and I talk about, or even I had a conversation with the principal at my son's school. And I said, I do therapy, but not with kids, not with children my son's age, just because you have to know what works for you, your temperament, because at the end of the day, people are investing into their future. When they're choosing to sit down on a couch with you, they're choosing to open up, and they're paying a lot of money, whether it's through insurance or whether it's that copay piece or if they have Medicaid. People are taking time out of their day. So one thing I always say is like, you have to, as a therapist, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. You have to draw boundaries. Like I know that with the beauty of social work, or even as a counselor, you can do whatever, right? I was in the hospital the other day, and it's so crazy. It was a nurse. I was just laying there and I overheard their conversation at the nurse's station. They were talking about therapy. And the lady was like, oh yeah, I have this therapist. And she's like, oh, she's a social worker. And she's like, no, she's not a social worker. She's a licensed therapist. So it was so funny to me because I'm like, so another nurse came and I was like, or my nurse who was working with me, I said, was that you talking about therapy? And she was like, no, that wasn't me. I was like, because I heard them say that a social worker isn't a therapist, and the beauty of social work you can be a therapist if you have your master's degree. So just because you're doing therapy doesn't mean that you're not a social worker. And she was like, oh, she was like, that's a fun fact. I didn't know. And it's like, those are one of those things where you see that as professionals, we're always giving so much of ourselves out that just hearing, like, it did something to me, being able to be in a hospital and hearing nurses taking the recourses to get into therapy because they know that they need that outlet. I One of those things when you say like you connect with working professionals, it talks about, or you speak about, or you can relate to that trauma that people pick up on their experience. So I just wanted to throw that in there because there's a lane for working professionals. Like, you don't have to, as a therapist, we think that we have to see everybody, right? But we really don't. You can really create your niche and be great at that. So I just think that that's a very key thing that you did on your journey. How long did it take for you to like realize that?
Yeah. I want to say that journey was probably a year's worth of just doing some like internal like searching, if you will, because there's a big part of my career starting out where, man, I was struggling. There's times where I had months where I would be losing like $3,000 here, $4,000 there, just simply because I didn't have enough business. Once things started to settle, I was able to be a little bit more choosy or picky with who I went to meet with. And from there, I started to see like, hey, like there's something about this group of people, right? And when we talk about like business and things like that, you have these avatars, right? So my avatar, I think a real ideal avatar is the person who has a business idea and they're working a current 9 to 5 and they don't have the time or the confidence to actually implement this business idea. And for me, I help them to make their dreams come realities. And that's because I went through that myself. And at 12, 15 years old, not too many kids are experiencing that. So I'll say about a year. About a year is what it took me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my journey too, and I did that. But see, I early on, if I realize something isn't for me, like I don't care. 3 months, I'm out because I have to be able to serve the population I'm with. And in my internship, I was able to realize that. So I do want to touch base before we transition into another segment on your bachelor's degree in social work, right? But then you went and got your licensed mental health clinician degree. How did that come about?
Yeah, I did my internship in the schools as a social worker. So I would go to kids' houses and do check-ins or put together lunches so they had something over the course of the weekend to eat, because a lot of kids depended on school lunch to eat, if you will. And I always knew that I wanted to work in the schools and nothing else. And I started to think about it, well, why don't I just become a school counselor, right? Because for me, my school counselor, he played a pivotal part in my life, because senior year, I was sitting around just kind of waiting for the year to end and graduate. And he asked me a question like, hey, like, have you thought about college? And the answer was no. I didn't think I was good enough to go. And I just remember from me and him sitting down one-on-one, day in and day out, putting together, my resume, putting together my application. And fortunately, I was accepted into college, and it really just turned my life all around, if you will. And for me, that was something I said I can do for someone else. So it really was me knowing like, hey, this is my lane. And then even when I became a school counselor, and for some people, they may think like doing therapy in school, not necessarily I was doing like guidance counselor, as some people call it, where I'm changing classes, talking about college, and that stuff is fun. But there was so much admin work that you wasn't really able to touch the students. And for me, that's when I said, hey, there's another level to this. And I started to become a therapist, like an actual licensed mental health therapist. And ironically, I don't work with kids, but it's still that act of talking to someone one-on-one and giving them maybe something that they've never had, which is, a listening ear, a role model in some instances, or a mentor. And overall, like I said, just a coach, if you will. Some people like to look at it like that. So, yeah.
And that's one of the beauty, because when did you get your degree in your bachelor's and in your master's?
Yeah. I got my bachelor's in 2014, And then I got my master's in 2017. I went to Clemson University for my master's. And then I got my intern license to be a registered mental health therapist. That was in 2019, and I became fully licensed in 2021. So that part has been 5 years that I've been fully licensed.
So I wanted to, because one of the things that I realized after graduating from my master's program, and I won't say it's any knock to the school that I was attending, it's just when you have life and you're working and everything is so busy, I felt like once I graduated, I didn't have much resources. Like, it was okay, I have my master's degree, now what? Like, now coming back into South Florida, I was able to reconnect with somebody who helped me learn more about the social work industry. Like, I had a teacher who taught me, because, and the reason I asked about, your degrees was because they have, like, when you get your social work degree, you can go through the master's program and get your master's within 7 months to 1 year, which will be like, the quicker option. But in your case, you had your bachelor's degree, but you went in the licensed mental health clinician route. Was there a disconnect because maybe you didn't know about the opportunity of being able to get it versus going because it took you 2 years to get that? And what do you think was the determining factor of that piece?
Yeah. And to answer your question, like, I do think there was a big disconnect for me, because I would hear people say, like, oh, there's a lot you can do with a social work degree, but it wasn't until I saw, like, my peers working for, like, the NFL, the NBA, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, you can do this with a social work degree? And the answer was yes. So for me, it was a big disconnect, because I just didn't know how far I could take it. But I think a determining factor was me kind of being dead set on, like, hey, this is what I wanted to do. I think there was a part of me that had some thoughts that, like, I didn't want to be the guy taking kids out of their homes or doing DCF reports. And I think that's the stigma with social work. It's like, oh, you're going to be pulling people out their homes. It's like, no, there's so much more that we can do. Even to your point about working in the hospitals, that's a big part. I actually have a sister-in-law that works in the hospitals and do a lot of case management work in those things. So I think a major determining factor was me knowing that I wanted to do something with, like, mentorship, counseling, and then later on, like I said, I found out it was really, like, this subset of people, so yeah.
And that's at least we all have different routes, but you still got there. You're still doing therapy, you're still serving, even if it took you longer. It's something that you learned along the way. I don't know what the discipline and the curriculum is like when you're doing the licensed mental health clinician route, but you see it or you learn, because at social work, I feel like even in my bachelor's program, there's lifelong lessons that I've learned that even when I went to my master's program, it came with me. Everything just made sense. So I know, like, I brought that up because it goes back to us as professionals connecting and staying connected. And, like, coming back to Miami, I was discouraged. I wasn't even gonna pursue licensure because I was like, at this point, I been working in the field for forever, but none of my hours got counted. And I was like, you know what, let me shift out of that mindset. Let me reach out, because I wasn't one of those people who had a lot of friends or a cohort, because I would stop. I finished all of my hours, right? Or I finished all of my schoolwork, but I needed all of my hours. So I never had a set cohort. And I had to put my pride to the side and say, okay, let me ask somebody for help. Right? We didn't have the best relationship, but I'm like, at this point, I didn't pay all this money, invested into my degree, but what's next for me? And she gave me her supervisor, and it's funny because I'm actually interviewing her tonight, right? And the thing that I loved about her was that some people would have said, oh yeah, I can do it. And she's like, no, like, you don't even know if I'm gonna be the right fit for you. Tell me what your interests are, and I will connect you with somebody, or I'll give you a few people so that you can interview them to see if they're an appropriate fit for you. And that's when I felt like I got my power back as a social worker. Graduating, just feeling so lost, not knowing what's next, because like you said, in the hustle and bustle, right? Like, especially people who take the entrepreneur route in social work, like you constantly have to be working or doing therapy. I'm sorry, not social work. In therapy, you constantly seeing clients. So you're so burnt out with what you're doing that you kind of forget the network of people. So
Mm.
that's like one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do now, or one of like just realizing as social workers, as therapists, how much power we have in owning that and taking that back, because we give so much of ourselves out that we can sometimes, also neglect ourselves in the process of that. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because it's
Yeah.
one of those things that, like, when you speak to people and you're like, it makes the light bulb go off, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the only reason I knew about it is because in my professor at that time told me about the advanced standing program when people were getting ready to transition out of social work. She's like, why would you transition out if you can get your master's degree in 1 year? And it took her, I would have never known that if it wasn't for that professor to drop that gem. So you're not the only one,
I
like
appreciate that.
it's a pool, but I did want to just touch base on that of all, like, I'm very big on, and I think the network of people that I'm like connected to now, they give so much. They're always willing to help. They always want to see other social workers win. And one of those things, and that's why I created the podcast, is because people don't see all of the work that we do behind the scenes. They don't see all of those families, all those people that we're touching. Like, in your career path is so unique, right? Because you do therapy for entrepreneurs. That's so different,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's some people who have a mixed pool of people. You say that you know people who are working in NFL with social work degrees. Can you touch on that
Mm-hmm.
a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I real quick want to clarify, like, the part that I'm touching on uh, is it finding my people, or is it the dynamics of, like, with, like, all that we do as social workers, how I pour into myself, the networking, the social part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for me, like, with the networking, and you said it really well, like, as an entrepreneur, you can start to work in, like, these silos where you kind of forget there's an outside world. For me, I work 5 days out of 4 days, really. But out of those 4 days, 3 of them I'm working from home. So I'm not really seeing anybody. And, it could be a little tough, right? And I think podcasts like these, networking events, they're great for me. And it's actually some goals that I give to a lot of my clients. And now, as I'm saying it, I need to actually, like, take some of that advice, because you do forget that there's a whole other world to therapy, right? So I have some friends that are doing things that are on a leadership role, where they talk to, like, the CEOs or the directors of companies, and they're showing them how to reach and connect with some of their employees, or they're doing full self-care days, right? So workshops where they are able to teach their employees, like, hey, this is how you manage burnout. And the reason why that's so important is because if you do the research, and I know ChatGPT is big nowadays, but if you were to ask ChatGPT how much money is lost each year in America due to absentees, right? Someone just calling out because of their mental health, it is in the billions, and I want to say in the maybe even in the trillions of dollars of productivity lost. So what we do is important. I need to take some of that advice myself and make sure that I'm connecting, because it can be easy. It can be easy to get lost. And what's funny about social work and the social workers is that there's a strong pool, even though we may not be, like, big in numbers. There's a strong pool of people of color in this field, and I think it's because of stories like mine, stories like yours, I'm sure, where how important it is to connect with other people and be a resource to your community.
Mm-hmm.
And to even add more to what you were saying, I was thinking more about how social work is on a micro level and a macro level. That was something I took away a lot from my program. So funny enough, I know a guy who has a MSW, and he has a seat. I think you call them seats in, like, a district here in Florida or something like that. So he's in policy, right? Which you don't think much when you think about social work. So there's a lot that we can do, and it's so important to make sure you connect with all these people to see, like, is there more that I can be doing? Is there, like, a different lane of social work that I want to do? Because, like I said, it's not just taking kids out of their homes or even just doing therapy. So
Yeah, and that's the beauty of social work, that it's so broad, in that, because I don't, let me not say I don't take kids kids out of people. I don't take kids out of people's home. I
Yeah.
say we strengthen families, and then, as needed, right? Because like I tell people, like some of the stigmas is that it's a lot of removals that you do when you're in child welfare, and it's really not. Like some of the times when you go out into and investigate, and that's why I did like early on in my career path as being and working in child welfare, it exposed me to so much. Like being a child protective investigator, we would see, right, like when you call in a report to the abuse hotline, it's anonymous, right? But as an investigator, we kind of know, right, who calls it in. And sadly, right, sometimes it would be schools calling it in on families. And then when you go out and you investigate the situation, it's just because that norm is not their norm. So something that they may equivalate to abuse, abandonment, and neglect is not abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So a lot of the things are misinterpreted. But you, as an investigator, or when you call the hotline, the state has a duty to respond. So if it meets that threshold or that criteria, the investigator goes out and confirms whether it's true or not, But I want to say a lot of times, like, removals are always the last option. Unless you walk into a present danger situation, you put services in place. You help and meet these people at their most vulnerable moments, because sometimes these cases that are called in are retaliatory. Some of them are custody disputes, one calling it on the other, like there are children who are really in dangerous situations, right? And then at those points, if, like I always tell people, if they were removed, they had to be removed, but that has shaped me early on into my career field, and it was essential for me to do that. And I'm still in it because I have a passion and I love it, right? And then I now started doing therapy on a minimal basis, because for me, therapy is a lot, like it is a lot. It's a different lane. And then it's just that, as a social worker, like I said, I feel like in this season, I'm finally getting my power back. I'm finally stepping into, okay, I don't have to stay in child welfare if I don't want to. I can still do child welfare, because when I do therapy, I do it with child welfare cases. That's the type of therapy I'm in now, because I learned that that's my niche, right? Trauma work is heavy, right? So in that, I like to be able to help these families who were at their lowest be restored. I started doing child parent psychotherapy, where I started the training, but I stopped. But I was able to see these parents relearn, or help them relearn their children again, help them rebuild that bond and that connection again. So it's like, you're absolutely right about therapy being such a broad, and it's a healing field, right? So one thing that I love about you, and when my husband told me he met you, like my light bulb went off, because he met you at a Christian event, a Good Brothers event. And I was like, oh, he's a therapist and doing therapy, and he's a Christian. So how does that work, where you incorporate like faith into your practice and what you do? And as a matter of fact, give us an overview, because we touched briefly on your business, but give us the full description of your business, the population you serve, and then I want you to transition into how you incorporate your faith beliefs, or people who have faith beliefs, into therapy.
Yeah. Great question. So, like I said, it's these entrepreneurs and professionals that I work with, and believe it or not, some of them have already had experience with therapy. I think now we've gotten to the point where people have heard about therapy and they may have even tried it. But what I've realized is that for some people, when they go to therapy, it doesn't work, not because therapy doesn't work, but it was just the wrong fit in terms of therapists. And that's a big thing that we need to talk about, not just in this podcast, because
you
time.
can touch.
Okay,
You can touch
okay,
on it.
got
Let's touch
it.
on
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
because I was just telling that's the key thing. Like you said, you have to, just how I needed to. I know that you need to interview a therapist, right? Because you have to, and that's when I overheard that conversation in the hospital, and she's giving her therapist. In my mind, I mean, I'm like, she may be that therapist may be the perfect fit for you, but that therapist needs to be the perfect fit for that person. So I tell people, you can't just Don't just choose somebody off a directory, right?
Exactly.
Choose and interview these people because it's an investment.
Mm-hmm.
So you go ahead and
Yeah,
take
yeah,
that away,
yeah.
like you were
Nah,
saying.
definitely, definitely. So there was a point I wanted to make when you were actually speaking. So someone could call DCF, which is our here in Florida, when a kid is in trouble, we think there's abuse, we'll call DCF to go do a wellness check. And like you said, for some cultures, what they see is normal, other cultures may not, right? Now, obviously, like some things are just like flat out clear across the board, but some things are just different. When it comes to mental health, it's so important to have people of color or people that are of your background, because there can also be a misdiagnosis based on just culture or all these different things. So a great example is how something like ODD, so oppositional defiant disorder, which you'll see like in kids, ODD may be seen from someone who may not work with this population, maybe even myself, because I don't work with kids. But what that kid may really have is ADD. It's not that they're trying to disagree with you or be oppositional, so defiant and all that stuff, but they just have a tough time connecting or relating to the information, or maybe they're very forgetful. So in situations like that, it's very, very important. And that's just one small piece of it. Even in therapy, I use a lot of examples, whether from sports, from movies. I mean, so many different things that we relate to that makes what I know as a therapist digestible, is what I like to call it. So when you're trying to find a therapist, you need to find someone that can relate, someone that has experience with what you're going through, and it's someone that is your style. Because some therapists, they may not do a lot of techniques, they may just do a lot of relating. And in therapy, we call that person-centered therapy, right? We believe that they have everything that they need to overcome their problems. We just pull it out of them. For me as a therapist, and this is going back to the other question, more about my business, what separates me, I use something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's exactly what it sounds like, where there's this art of letting go, accepting and embracing things that we cannot change. But then there's this commitment to the values that we have. Within this framework, there's these 6 principles. And one of the principles, I'll just touch on one of them, is called the self. So we know this, especially in our faith base, and this is me tying it together, that there's like this flesh, this skin, right? But underneath that, there's something spiritual, something that has this like energy or this life. That part is what we connect in acceptance and commitment therapy as the self. So a great example is when someone passes, or us as believers, when we pass, we know that the body will stay here, but something is going to another place. That something is the self. When it comes to how I tie this in, for my clients who are spiritual, sometimes we do go and give Bible verses. Like today I had a session, and it's funny, I talked about the story of Gideon. So for anyone that's watching, check out Judges chapter 6 and 7, and you'll hear about the story of Gideon, where he was chosen by God to defeat the Midianites. And the Midianites are these like powerful, strong, like almost like monstrous like people, and they were just wreaking havoc all over Israel. And Gideon, who didn't have much confidence in himself, very similar to my clients, God said, you're actually the one that I'm gonna choose out of all these people to lead and destroy these people. And what's great about that story is that he went into battle with 32,000 men, right? And he was facing 133,000 Midianites, so he was outnumbered 4-1. And God said, you have too many people, right? With only his 32,000, and he dwindled that down to 22,000, and he still said you have too many. And he took him from 32,000 to 22,000 to only 300 men. And with those 300 men, he went and he slaughtered the Midianites. And what I love about that story is it talks about how even with what you have, if you take action, you will have enough. You may even surprise yourself. And that's just one of the ways. I mean, there's so many different ways that I could talk how I tie it in, but on a psychological base level, like there's this sense of self, which is what we know to be the spirit, and that's what we connect to. So yeah.
That was deep. That was powerful.
I hope it wasn't too much.
No, it was really good. It was very needed, because one of my favorite scriptures, right? Because like I'm more of an introvert, right? And I'm not one to be in the crowd, right? But I always, one of the scriptures that resonates with my spirit always is that even when you feel like you're alone, that there's always more for you than there are against you. So you saying that and hearing that story, just a little piece that you brought, it brought that back to my memory of that there is always more for you than there is against you, even when the odds feel stacked against you. Because that story that you touched on, God didn't need that 33,000, or I mean how much was it
Yeah,
again?
33,000.
33,000.
Yeah.
It just, he needed just that 300 to conquer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in therapy, right? With people coming into those vulnerable spaces, it's important for them to know that it's that safe space for you. And you don't need, like, there, even though you may not feel like it, you may feel like you're on an island because people don't agree with your choices. One of the biggest things as a therapist, right? We have those tough conversations, but I always remind my clients that this is your safe space, right? We're going to talk, but I'm going to hold you accountable, because the biggest thing, like, all I needed you to do was get in the room, right? Because the hardest thing was to get in the room. When we think of that stages of change, you have the pre-contemplation, the contemplation, and even it's like one of those things where in this season of my life, right, I'm learning that everybody, it doesn't always have to be substance related. There's always stages of changes in life, right? And some people are in that pre-contemplation stage, but they'll get to the contemplation stage, but at their time, in their season. So it's very good that you're not afraid to incorporate your beliefs and to who allows it, right? Because some people are not open to it, right? And that's where we meet our clients where they're at, and you respect them. And that's one of the beauties of therapy, right? It's not a one size all fits method. And I tell people that when I do therapy, I prepare, because I need to know what fits this client, what fits this family. Everybody's different, and that's why I say I do minimal, right? I do minimal therapy, because how I do therapy, it takes a lot of research. That psychoeducation piece. And that's why I tell people, like, it's important for us to continue, like you said, that chat GPT that you brought up. I've interviewed somebody who told me that they ran into clients where people in relationships were getting so mad at each other that both of them went into ChatGPT having discussions with ChatGPT. And what I had to learn with ChatGPT is that ChatGPT can be a beautiful thing, right? Research purposes. But I've asked ChatGPT questions different ways and got different answers.
Talk about
so
it.
At the end of the day, it's still a robot, right? Like this ChatGPT was not designed to replace humans, right? People may try to do it, and that's why I always tell people, you can have whatever I don't feel like, my personal belief is that when it comes down to therapy and social work, ChatGPT can't replace us, because no matter how many therapeutic modalities it can tell you, you need a person to help you process that, because all of that insight isn't in there. Like, technology can always fail you.
Let me jump on that, man. I love that topic, ChatGPT, therapists, all that, because people are thinking like, hey, can I just solve my problems with ChatGPT? And I'm not being biased when I say no, and I give you guys a great example. So one of my favorite movies of all time is Gladiator. And in this movie, Maximus, who's the main character, he's a war general, and he's captured and he's sold into slavery, and now he's fighting for his life, right? And this is what you see in the Colosseum. And in this movie, he's given lesser armor and inferior weapons, and he's told, hey, you have to go and fight all these people. And there's one scene when he's given, or he has to fight 5 other Romans, if you will, and they have all the armor, better weapons. And Maximus goes out and he slaughters all 5 of the people that's in the arena with him. And this is where the famous scene comes, where he looks into the stands and he says, "Are you not entertained?" And what's great about that scene is that it didn't matter if Maximus had superior weapons or if he just had a pencil. Because of who he was able to take these people down. And the reason why I bring up this story is because ChatGPT is only a weapon, and a weapon is only as strong as its wielder. If you don't have the mental capabilities in terms of like self-awareness or the emotional awareness, or let's say you're not good at being consistent, or all these different things, then ChatGPT is not going to work for you. Like it's for someone that's already made certain strides and you've been in therapy, you have like a good hold on things, like you can then trust ChatGPT. But if you're just starting out, never sat with a therapist, don't know how this whole mental health game works, you need to sit with a professional first, because they can be the weapon and the wielder with you, and that will really help you to get your goals met when it comes to mental health.
That's so true that you said that, because I use ChatGPT for flyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like it was the both. It took me maybe 3 days to get this flyer done, because every time I put a picture in there, ChatGPT kept editing it, and I'm like, this doesn't even look like me.
Mm-hmm.
I literally had to take 3 days because I got so frustrated, and I had to, like, I liked the design, but then the wording was off, and then every time you try, and I had to realize that this is a robot, or this is technology, it will fail you. So I had to go back and analyze, okay, what do I do? I had to do that. When I tell you it took me 3 days to do a flyer, where sometimes I've used it for
Mm-hmm.
a TikTok and did it in 5 minutes, right? A quick flyer. But this flyer required intricate details. And I had to realize, like you said, ChatGPT is only as good as the person who's behind it. So you have to equip yourself to even know how to use and do that. So I wanted to touch base on this because you said something very key. You said that you have to go through therapy to, sit and like learn things with a person who can hold the weapon and wield it, right? Have you done therapy in your personal life? Because you're like so poised, you're so knowledgeable. Like, have you ever did therapy?
Yeah. Good question. I tell my clients, if you go to a BMW, let's say store, you want to buy a BMW, you're gonna want to talk to someone who's driven a BMW, right? And for me, I've driven that BMW, so I've been to therapy. And the first time I went, because I've been a couple times, right? The first time I went, it was because I was dealing with something called illness anxiety disorder. So this is where you start to have all these anxieties around maybe your health, or maybe certain like physical things you may be feeling. So for some people who have panic disorders, they may have a little bit of this as well, where they may think they're going to have a heart attack, so they go to the emergency room, and then the doctors say you're totally fine, it's just anxiety. And for some reason they just can't believe that. And for me, that was my first time going. And the reason why and this is when you should actually go to therapy. So for anybody watching, a good sign that you need to go to therapy is when you start to see your careers going down, right? Because of these mental health conditions, work, education, relationships. I would even say if things that used to bring you joy no longer brings you joy. So if you used to love going on trips, love going to the gym, love hanging out with the guys, and these things do not bring you any happiness, it is a sign that you're needing to go to therapy. And specifically, that's called anhedonia, right? That's a big sign for depression. So for me, I've been by myself. I've gone because I wanted to be a better husband for my wife. So I've done it individually. And then I've gone as a couple, right? Gone and done couples therapy. And for me, every time I've gone, I've realized something new, right? Because we can be a little biased. And I think that's even why ChatGPT isn't the best, because ChatGPT doesn't know you like you know you, right? And when you sit with a therapist, and this is another point that I make with ChatGPT, like therapists can see through your BS, right? They know when you're BSing. So I sometimes have a client say, "Yo, coach, I'm just a procrastinator." I'm like, no, you're just afraid, right? Because now if I say, hey, how do you help me overcome my fears of, let's say, being successful rather than procrastination, now you're going to get a different response from ChatGPT. But if you don't know that, you're going to think, oh, I just need to work on procrastination. And it's like, no, like we need to talk about these fears that you have about success. So long answer, yes, I've been. I think I'd be a bad therapist if I didn't. And I think all therapists should go to therapy at least once.
Yes, you cannot help anybody you haven't been before. You cannot, like somebody made a point to me. They said you can only go as high as your leader. And me being in a supervisor role, I never wanted to have that mindset, right? I always want, because I believe in, like, my family has always pushed me to go higher. They didn't limit me because, like, my mother she was an immigrant. I mean, she's a citizen now, but she came here from another country, migrated from another country. So me and my cousins, and we're like all first generations to go to college. So I know that, like, I never wanted to be that leader who is afraid to allow the people that I supervise to go higher. I literally walked in. One of the things, like, it's so funny, and that's why I asked about how you incorporate, faith into your profession, because how I incorporate faith into my profession, everywhere I'm at is for a reason and a season. I literally went into my last job, right, where I was a supervisor. I knew that I was training my replacement. And that didn't scare me because I'm only here for, I didn't know how long my season would be there, but I seen something in her that I'm like, okay, you're gonna replace me. I don't know when, why, or how it's gonna happen, right? It was a lady, she was an administrative assistant. This was conversation, because like I said, I'm an introvert. This was a conversation she had with the staff, because I would go in, do my work, and go out, right? I just watch, observe, that's it. She said, that girl's too smart. She's only going to be here for a year. I'm like, Miss Liz don't know what she's talking about. Like, Miss Liz doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not going nowhere, right? But in my mind, God had already given me that I'm training my replacement. And I seen the qualities in her greatly. I mean, till this day, she has my phone number. We speak. She's like one of my good friends, and when that season came, I got pregnant with twins. So I had to come back to South Florida, right? I didn't know why. I knew I was training my replacement, but I didn't know why I was training my replacement, right? So I always know that for every reason where I'm placed at, right? Whether it's therapy, whether it's I'm doing therapy with a family, whether I believe that God is so intentional that nothing in my life is a mistake. If it's something that I need to learn from people, that's what I'm there to learn from. Like in that last position, I learned so much from my last leader. It prepared me and equipped me for where I'm at today. And I think, like you said, all of this is a journey. When you going back to what you said about, like, this is just a flesh. After this deteriorates, we're going somewhere else. So it's all about, doing the work. And, like, every time I interview somebody, I want to touch. This interview could have easily, like, I want to say we had a whole script, right, that we prepared that we didn't really touch on. And it just flowed as needed, because we could have went and said, okay, yeah, we're both African Americans. Let's speak about African therapy in the African American culture. But I felt like I covered that already. But you have so much more that you've accomplished, that you've been through. And I just want to thank you for just being open and embracing and being open to the tough questions, right? Because this is a vulnerable space to have to talk about things that, you probably weren't prepared to talk about today, right? And you did that. So I do want to say thank you, because I'm a big believer in all it takes is one. If you can heal, or somebody can leave and feel empowered based off of what you said, then our job is done, And one thing about YouTube, where I put, like, people tell me, oh, there's so many different platforms that you can go and put your podcast on. I'm like, no, it's just YouTube for now, because I'm not going to burn myself out, right? And YouTube is going to be here for forever. People can, you know what, I'm going to go back and look at this whenever. YouTube's been here for the longest, and I'm in this season where I'm just going to take it a step by step, day by day. If I don't post it now, I could post it later when I'm in that season time frame. But I did want to thank you. And before we conclude, I wanted to know, is there anything that you feel like we didn't cover that you want to cover today?
Yeah. Good question. And again, I love being here. If there was one thing I had to say to the people that's listening, it's this: a problem is only a problem if you deem it a problem. And when you look at that statement, I actually challenge you guys to write it down. A problem is only a problem if you deem it a problem. The strongest word, the most powerful word in that whole sentence is not problem, is you. You have the power to decide, do I want to let this go, or do I want to make this a thing, if you will? It's not whether or not things happen in life that really determines the quality of our life, but it's how we respond, it's how we carry the things in our life that determines the quality of our life. So if you always find yourself having a woe is me moment, or the world is out to get me, my boss or whoever is out to get me, trust me when I say it's not them, it's you, because it's all about how you're carrying this stuff. So if I had to leave them with something, it'll be that. And that's really the the bulk of what acceptance and commitment therapy is. If I had to boil it down to one thing, it'll be that.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation was very powerful. It was very much needed for the social workers because my heart is always with the clients that we serve, but also the professionals in the field, whether that's therapy, whether that's social workers, because we do tough work. And as much as we pour into others, we also need to pour back into each other. So I just wanted to thank you again for joining me on the podcast.
No doubt. I'm glad to be here. This was fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for your transparency and your courage. Your story is proof that becoming a statistic is not inevitable and that healing is possible when you choose it. You're not only changing lives through therapy, you're changing narratives. To everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, share it, send it to a brother, a son, friend, or a colleague who needs to hear that there is another way. And remember, seeking help doesn't make you weak, it makes you free.